BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Tim Wilcox. High drama on the Hill as Republicans pull the vote on their healthcare bill at the last minute after failing to win enough support for it to pass. Repealing and replacing the former administration's plan was a key promise of President Trump and his party. So, where do they go from here?
So, Obamacare is exploding with no Democrat support. We couldn't quite get there. We're just a very small number of votes short.
And more arrests in connection to the London terror attack as police try to establish whether Khalid Masood acted alone or not. Hello and welcome to our viewers on public television in America and also around the globe. It has been a day of extraordinary political drama on Capitol Hill as the Republicans tried and failed to put their healthcare legislation to a vote. From early morning, the big question was, did they have the support to get the bill across the line? But after intense last-minute discussions between Speaker Paul Ryan and Donald Trump, just minutes before the planned vote, the President called the Speaker and told him to pull it. A little earlier, Mr. Trump had this to say.
We had no Democrat support. We had no votes from the Democrats. They weren't going to give us a single vote, so it's a very difficult thing to do. I've been saying for the last year and a half that the best thing we can do, politically speaking, is let Obamacare explode. It is exploding right now. It's many states have big problems. Almost all states have big problems. I was in Tennessee the other day, and they've lost half of their state in terms of an insurer. They have no insurer, and that's happening to many other places. I was in Kentucky the other day, and similar things are happening. So Obamacare is exploding with no Democrat support. We couldn't quite get there. We're just a very small number of votes short in terms of getting our bill passed.
Well, up on Capitol Hill, this was what Speaker of the House Paul Ryan had to say.
I will not sugarcoat this. This is a disappointing day for us. Doing big things is hard. All of us, myself included, we will need time to reflect on how we got to this moment, what we could have done to do it better. But ultimately, this all kind of comes down to a choice. Are all of us willing to give a little to get something done? Are we willing to say yes to the good, to the very good, even if it's not the perfect?
Well, BBC's Laura Bick has been following all the developments up on Capitol Hill. What an extraordinary day. President Trump effectively trying to blame the Democrats, but this is his Republican Party at war with itself, isn't it?
Well, yes, after a day of drama, a week of drama, after bringing this vote right to the brink, there is defeat and disappointments, both for the Republican Party and for the President themselves. For the Republicans, they've been talking about repealing and replacing Obamacare for the last 7 years, but they just, in the end, couldn't agree how they would replace it and what they would replace it with. The moderates said the reforms went too far, that it left too many people without insurance. The Conservatives, on the other hand, believed that this bill did not go far enough. They wanted more of those healthcare reforms brought in by President Obama repealed, brought back, and the two sides just couldn't find a consensus. It is an embarrassing setback for the Republicans because this is at the first time of asking, at the first time they had a chance to put something through the House, they have failed. And it's embarrassing for the President. He may want to blame the Democrats, but he is Donald Trump. He wrote The Art of the Deal. He prides himself on making deals. And when it came to the first deal he's tried to make, this first political deal, he's failed at it.
So is that it as far as any new healthcare bill is going to be promoted now?
It seems that they want to leave Obamacare in place for now. They're going to move on to tax reform. They're going to move on to other things, just as President Trump's ultimatum promised. He said, vote for change or there'll be no change. So it seems that they're going to leave Obamacare in place. Now, when it comes to that, Democrats are also scratching their heads because they know, and they said in this press conference, that this bill needs nurturing, not neglect. They know that there are problems within Obamacare. For some, insurance premiums are rocketing. For others, it does mean that they are losing the choice of healthcare that they would like. So they know the bill is not perfect. How both sides now work together to find some way of creating a healthcare that works for all, your guess is as good as mine.
All right. OK, Laura, for now, thank you. Well, for more on the politics at play here, I spoke a little earlier to the Republican strategist Ron Christie. Now, he's a former advisor to George W. Bush. This was an organising principle of the Republican Party. This was a campaign pledge by Donald Trump. I mean, how much of a setback or disaster is this for him?
Well, it's a very big disappointment for the President of the United States, who has campaigned vigorously and said the first thing he wanted to do with the Republican Congress was to find a way to repeal the Affordable Care Act, President Obama's signature legislation. And we've seen a flurry of activity up into, in fact, the last couple of hours of Republicans who thought they were confident that they had the vote. Paul Ryan, at the insistence of the president, pulled the bill. It's a big disappointment. There's no way to sugarcoat this. There's no way to say anything differently than this, Tim. The Republicans had 7 years, and today they blew it.
Yeah, and it shows open warfare within the party. Paul Ryan describes it as growing pains of being in government. Is that how you would describe it?
No, I'd call it a disaster. What the Republicans were trying to do, yesterday was the 7th year anniversary of the day that President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act into law. What Republicans wanted to do was to find a way to put a bill on the House of Representatives floor to begin the repeal process. What they forgot along the way is the art of negotiation, the art of the deal, as Mr. Trump would say. They needed to cobble together a group, a coalition of the most conservative members of the House of Representatives, as well as some of the more moderate members, people from New York City, Philadelphia, some of our big urban areas. And while the House and the White House were busy focusing on those more conservative members, at their peril and at their neglect, they forgot that you need 216 votes to pass. And unfortunately for them, they didn't get enough Republicans, knowing that no Democrat would join them.
Who's going to take the rap for this? Can Paul Ryan survive?
Oh, Paul Ryan's in great shape. Look, Paul Ryan is the one person who is more trusted than anybody else in the House of Representatives by the conservatives, by the moderates, and even, frankly, by the Democrats. So at the end, he's fine. His speakership is not in peril. Now, if I were to be a betting person and look down the line, then the person right beneath him, Kevin McCarthy, the House Majority Leader, the person right under him, Steve Scalise, the House Majority Whip, the person who's in charge of counting the votes, I think a lot of finger wagging is going to be going, why couldn't the two folks in leadership whose responsibility it is to deliver the votes for the Speaker, why couldn't they deliver them?
But this has very serious knock-on effects, doesn't it? I mean, the money they were going to save from this, they were going to use for other things. We've got the tax credits, the tax credit reform, or the tax reform as well. This doesn't give any sort of traction, any momentum to the Trump administration, does it?
No. In fact, they were looking at some $900 billion of revenue that they were going to spend over the next 10 years for other Republican priorities in health care. Now they have to go back to the drawing board, Tim, and the question is, when they get in the room, when they shut the door, when they lock the door, what can they find consensus on? What can the Republicans and the conservative faction and the moderate faction, and most importantly, working with the Senate and the president, come together and find a consensus to bring to the president's desk for signature? At this juncture, I don't see that coming anytime soon. OK, just
a final question. I mean, what would your advice be now, then, to this administration?
My advice to the president and the administration is simply this. The next time that Republicans seek to put a major piece of legislation on the floor, let's talk with the entire caucus first. Let's talk with the United States Senate members and see what is in the realm of the possible. What are they able to do? What sort of horse trading needs to take place so that this sort of embarrassment, this sort of an inability to govern to the American people, because this looks bad from an optics perspective, doesn't happen again.
All right, Ron Christie, thanks very much indeed. You're watching BBC World News America. British police say they have made 2 more significant arrests as they try to establish whether the man who launched the attack this Wednesday in London was working alone or with others. 11 people have now been arrested. Detectives have also released the first image of the attacker, 52-year-old Khalid Masood. Here's our special correspondent, Lucy Manning.
The face of Khalid Masood, the face that confronted police officers at Parliament, the face that looked out of the car at pedestrians as he knocked them over. The 52-year-old was known by a number of names. Born Adrian Elms in Kent, by the time he was at Huntleys Secondary School for Boys in Tunbridge Wells, he was called Adrian Ajao after his mother got married. School friends remembered him as a sporty pupil who liked to party, a very nice guy.
Adrian was a nice lad, a fun guy, always laughing, always joking, worked reasonably hard, good at sport, played rugby very well, just an unassuming guy.
But Masood was soon developing a reputation for violence. In the sleepy Sussex village of Northiam, where he lived in his 20s, at the local pub he slashed a man in the face with a knife and was sent to jail.
Didn't have a very good reputation, definitely. I remember he was a bit of a troubled character, I think it's probably the way to describe it.
A family friend said this wasn't the only time Adi, as he was known in the village, turned violent.
The chap was looking at Adi when I was just sitting at the pool table, and I happened to look over, and he took umbrage against the landlord for looking at him like he was, and he flew over the bar. And luckily I was pretty close, because he got a glass. He was going to do him.
Masood spent time in 3 prisons, HMP Lewis, Waylands and Ford. Around 10 years ago, he worked in Saudi Arabia. It's not clear when he converted to Islam, but he started using the surname Masood at least 7 years ago. His mother now lives in a remote farmhouse in Carmarthenshire, which detectives searched yesterday.
They haven't been, from what I understand, in any sort of contact with their son for well over 20 years. And at the end of the day, when it comes to terrorism, unfortunately, nobody can be responsible for the action of their children.
Masood, we now know, launched his terror attack after staying overnight at a hotel in Brighton. He stayed in room 228. He seemed happy, staff said, untroubled by what he was about to do, that he was about to leave his hotel room to drive to London to kill.
He was joking and smiling and friendly. He was a very, very friendly person when he walked in. Really is. Actually, the receptionist said, you know, he's a lovely guest. I liked him, and even she put comments in the system. You know, as a nice guest.
There was nothing in his conduct or demeanour that would have let me get a feeling there's something weird about this guy, and he's just on his way to commit mass murder.
Detectives have searched the hotel and there have been more raids, more arrests. In Manchester, a car was taken away by police in Didsbury, and 2 arrests described by senior officers as significant were made there and in the West Midlands.
The police are still trying to build a picture of the man who came here to attack Westminster. They say their main aim now is to try and work out if he was acting alone, inspired by terrorist propaganda, or if there are others still out there who encouraged him, supported, or even directed this attack.
But it's clear there are still gaps in the police's knowledge.
What we're appealing to today is to the public to say, if, even in hindsight now, you realise something about Khalid Masood, something about his associates, something about his movement, something about his planning, now's the time to come forward and speak to our officers.
A bright student turned violent man turned terrorist. No one is still sure how or why. Lucy Manning, BBC News, Westminster.
You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme.
Allahu Akbar.
Oil, Arab issues and the American way. How a new play at Washington's Kennedy Center brings these themes together around a petrol station. It's one of the most contentious issues in Washington right now, and multiple investigations have been launched into alleged Russian interference in the US presidential election. For the campaign chairman of Hillary Clinton's failed bid, it is an issue that hits close to home. John Podesta has accused the FBI of double standards. It follows the agency's director James Comey going public about his inquiry into Mrs. Clinton's hacked emails just days before the vote, without mentioning any possible Russian role. Well, Philippa Thomas asked him if he was suspicious during the campaign.
Of course, we thought that was going on for some time, and argued to the press that they had to really look at that, try to dig into that and uncover it. But it was a revelation that the FBI was looking at that as early as now. Evidently, they were. It's kind of one more drip in something that I've been highly critical of the Bureau about, which is the double standard they applied in this campaign. The intervention, the number of resources they spent, the scores of FBI agents they had poring over Hillary Clinton's email server, which Jim Comey, the FBI director, ultimately concluded that it wasn't even a close call. There was nothing worth prosecuting there. Compared to their engagement on the Russia side, his intervention just 11 days before the election to say, I'm going to reopen this, the Clinton investigation, yet his total silence on, with respect to the Russian intervention and now the potential collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian actors was really a double standard that is still inexplicable to me.
You're very calm about this, but I imagine that when it was confirmed...
I'm very angry about it.
Yeah.
I've just learned to appear calm.
In Syria, the military battle to defeat so-called Islamic State in their home base of Raqqa is gaining ground. Earlier this month, Syrian forces, backed by their Russian and Iranian allies, recaptured the city of Palmyra for the second time in the past year. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, travelled to that iconic city to see the aftermath of Islamic State rule.
Palmyra, Roman ruins, precious world heritage. IS occupied this site twice in the past 2 years. Their last target, the Roman Theatre, a stage for grisly executions, slitting throats, shooting soldiers and civilians here. IS has lost this prize and ground beyond here to the Syrian military backed by its allies. The helicopter overhead is Russian. Palmyra matters, but the battles which lie ahead, including Raqqa, the IS's self-declared capital, matter more and are far more difficult. And that's because confronting IS in Syria means confronting a fundamental question. Are the West and countries in this region now willing to work with President Assad and his Russian and Iranian allies to fight their common enemy? The world knows of IS crimes now. In the basement of a deserted building, we're shown what's called a makeshift courtroom. And the paper trail of its brutal rule. Qatl, the Arabic word for execution. The crimes include leaving Islam, spreading corruption. 2 men called Ahmed were thrown from the top of a building, no reason given. The city of Palmyra, next to the ancient site, is a ghost town. People fled IS and the ferocious fighting here, including Syrian and Russian airstrikes. This is where some of the displaced have taken refuge, an abandoned school 100 miles away. 30 families here, including Fariha and her 5 children. She remembers the exact moment when IS fighters came to her door.
It was 4:45 in the morning. I opened the door and saw men shouting at me. They came in, weapons in hand, and took my husband and my niece. I was told they chopped off his head. They took my nephew, who was only 15. My brother-in-law was beheaded too.
Fariha doesn't know how her family will cope. It's the story of Syria. IS no longer occupies their home, but its dark shadow hasn't left their lives. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Palmyra.
You're watching BBC World News America. Now, a new play by one of the world's leading contemporary Arab theatre makers is having its world premiere at the Kennedy Center in Washington later. Called Petrol Station, it's a story about migrants, statelessness, refugees, war and oil. The author, Suleiman Al-Bassam, whose usual troupe of actors come from countries listed on the original presidential travel ban, is using an all-American cast. I caught up with him in final rehearsals.
Allahu Akbar.
It's a play set on a desolate border. The theme's Arabic, but performed by an all-American cast.
Petrol Station is a border play set ostensibly on a border in the Middle East, in the Gulf, in the oil-rich Gulf. Seem at first sight to be far away. When we appropriate the American idiom through the company of American actors,
Hello, Mama.
these themes around migrant workers, around borders, around identity and power relations take on a resonance that is very contemporary in today's America.
On stage, two colliding worlds. This Shia fighter performed in the style of American gospel. So what's the relevance of Arab political theatre in today's America?
I have a great relationship with the blacks. I have a great relationship with the blacks.
I do think that theatre in these times, as crucibles of dissent and as crucibles of truth, I do feel that arts organisations in America today are living under the pall of a certain amount of fear. They fear to be perceived as taking a position against the current administration. That's palpable.
I'm out of my world, into another darker netherworld.
Petrol Station, intended by its author to be theatre that challenges and explores the divisions and similarities between America and the Middle East.
It's a crime against nations.
It's fate. Out of my way.
And that's a play. Premieres in a few hours' time. Let's go back to our main story, the amazing political theatre, which has played out today over the healthcare bill here in the United States. In the end, the vote was pulled, but what a day of back and forth it's been. BBC's Anthony Zerka is alongside me now. I mean, if there was one thing that could unite the Republican Party, it was repealing Obamacare, wasn't it?
Yeah, they'd been talking about this for 7 years, that this was their agenda. They're talking about how horrible it was, how important it was to tear it up root and branch, in the words of Senator Mitch McConnell. And finally, after voting for it 50 times, sending it to Barack Obama over the past few years and having it vetoed, here was their chance. They control the presidency. They control both chambers of Congress. This was the first hurdle to get that repeal going and get it on the president's desk. And they stumbled over it. They fell on their faces. They couldn't get it through.
And at one stage, it looked like President Trump was going to tough it out. I mean, you know, Sean Spicer was saying, look, this vote's going to happen at 3:30 local time, and win or fail, we're going to have the vote.
Yeah, it was an interesting strategy and something they started last night, where they were basically putting down a marker and saying, this is going to happen. I think it was a way of getting the members of Congress who were wavering off the fence and committed to it. And they stuck by it, thinking that they were going to be able to push it through. But the more they pushed and the more they tried to negotiate with the right-wingers on one side and the moderates on the other, they kept pulling it farther apart to the point where people broke.
And then bizarrely, the president directly rings to national newspaper reporters.
Exactly. He called Robert Costa of the Washington Post, and apparently with no announcement, he picked up his phone and had Donald Trump on the other line saying, yeah, we pulled the bill. I mean, pretty amazing. And
not even through the White House switchboard.
Yeah, not even through the switchboard. Apparently, I guess from his cell phone, where he was talking to it, and Robert Costa was tweeting out, I'm talking to the president, while he was on the phone detailing what the president was saying, which was that this was the Democrats' fault, that they didn't cooperate with him, even though there are 44 more Republicans in the House of Representatives than Democrats right now. And it's pretty remarkable to see him turn towards the mainstream press. I suspect maybe to jump the gun on Paul Ryan, who was just about to have a press conference.
OK, 64 days in, this was the main legislative thing he was going to do. We've got plenty more down the line. The momentum now, where is it?
Well, it definitely hurts the momentum. I mean, it undermines his authority, his reputation as a deal maker. He said he was the closer. His press secretary said he was the closer coming in to seal the deal. He told voters when he was campaigning that was going to happen.
How many deals has he closed?
As president, he hasn't closed any deals yet. This was the first big legislative test. I mean, where it goes from now, he said in comments this afternoon after the bill failed that it's going to be tax reform, that he wants to focus on that. But that's made more complicated because there are tax components in healthcare reform that have to be dealt with in order to deal with taxes as a bigger package.
So America left with Obamacare. Anthony Zurcher, thank you very much. That is the end now of today's show. Find much more, of course, on the day's news on the website. Have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday at the same time. Bye-bye.